This is another archival upload of some of my previous mix critique videos. I apologize for the vertical format that this video is about to switch to. This is 296 to 300. This mix was sent in by Nicholas.
She says what she wants like it's nobody's business. Ice cold smile as they cry.
A couple things I'm noticing. One, the drums sound really fake. Like, there's nothing wrong with using samples, but you gotta try to find some way to make them sound more realistic. Other than that, everything seems kind of flat and like lacking life. Either that means that the performance wasn't great enough, like the people playing the song didn't have enough energy when they played it, but more likely you just compressed everything too much and kind of crushed all the soul out of it.
Know what to do, is this some kind of voodoo? I don't know what to do, is this some kind.
Energy picked up a little bit there, but now the rhythm guitar tone is really thin, really like overly harsh. It's not a good guitar tone. All right, man, so it's not a great mix. Again, it feels like you probably compressed everything too much and kind of crushed the life out of it. But really, it feels like a production issue more than anything else. It feels like the energy wasn't pulled out of the performers that needed to be there to get the energy that this track should have. I can kind of see the vision for it. I get the idea of the song, and just the way the song's written, it feels like it should just have a lot more energy overall, and it just doesn't. So that really seems like a production thing. Part of that is the program. Drums don't have any movement to them. They don't have any life. But in general, it just feels like there wasn't enough energy in the performance to begin with. And don't get me wrong, there are things you can do in a mix to kind of create fake energy, but really nothing is going to do as great a job of that as just actually capturing the right energy in their performance. And really, to get that right, you need a good producer. You need somebody that knows how to get the right energy out of the artist when they're tracking. Which, by the way, is a big part of what I do in the studio. So if you guys are trying to capture the right energy, let me know. This mix was sent in by Jack. All right, you got a lot of harsh high end going on, man. That hurts. Did you just crank 4K in the bass as loud as it could possibly go? What the fuck? Yeah, man, it feels like you took way too much out of the mid-range of everything, especially the bass, and you've just pushed the high mids of everything way too much. It feels kind of empty, but mostly it just feels harsh and painful and gross. It sounds like most of the source tones were probably okay, with maybe the exception of the bass. The drums sound like they were good source tones. The vocals sound like the source tones were good. The guitars sound like the source tones were pretty good, but like whatever you did EQ-wise, and also you've overcompressed everything. Like this is like flatline. Like it's really overcompressed. So yeah, there's a lot of issues here. It's mostly taking too much out of the mid-range and boosting way too much of the high mids, but it's also a lot of overcompression. But in general, like this just hurts to listen to, man. Because it sounds like the source tones were probably all right, you do have a chance to get a good mix out of this, but it's gonna involve starting over. But also, if you guys are trying to get a good mix on this, mixing's kind of what I do. So this mix was sent in by Brandon. This is another really short one, so we'll see what advice I can offer. All right, it sounds decent so far. The top end is definitely solid. Feels like you've probably overcompressed some stuff just a little bit, just pushing it a little too far, especially with the drums. But the biggest issue I'm noticing is you have a lot of sub-frequency information and not a lot of low mid information. You got to keep in mind that the low mids is where most of the low end energy is coming on most playback systems. If you have a ton of sub frequencies but not a lot of low mids, you're only going to hear that low end if you have a subwoofer. Even on what I'm listening on here, I don't hear that much of the sub frequencies on these monitors in this space. So the fact that that much is missing out of the low mids, it feels like it's missing a lot of the low end energy. Yeah, man, so that's really my only couple notes is you're overcompressing the drums a bit. You could probably rein in the low-end boominess of the kick a little bit more than it is, and you've definitely taken a little too much out of the low mids across the board, so it's kind of lacking some low-end punch. Sorry if I mispronounced this. This mix was sent in by Bjarn.
Let there be fire burning within any desire. When it is time, I will be brave.
Okay, it sounds pretty good so far. I think the biggest issue so far is the vocals are just a little too far in the front of everything else. That feels like they're kind of standing on their own and they're not really blending into everything else. So I would definitely back the vocals down a little bit more. Other than that, it sounds pretty good so far. Now that everything else kicked in, everything else doesn't really sound that great, man. Like, the vocals sounded okay in the beginning. I felt like they were probably lacking a little bit of saturation and they were definitely standing out a little too much. But the guitar tones and all the background elements in the intro sounded pretty good. But when everything kicks in, the drums don't sound good, the guitar tone doesn't sound good, the bass tone doesn't sound good. Like, pretty much everything does not sound great when we actually get into the track. And that's not a mixing thing, that's a source tone thing. Like, these needed to be recorded better.
Ready to go, riding more on his stop right. Instead of ink-use gasoline, no need for.
It also sounds like you've overcompressed everything, especially the guitars. It also sounds like you added like extra distortion to the guitars in the mix. That doesn't necessarily really sound like a natural distortion. Honestly, the biggest problem is the drum tones. The drums just don't sound good, man. Like, you need a much better drum recording. If you get a really good drum tone and a really good vocal tone, it doesn't really matter what everything else sounds like. I know that sounds weird, but like a really solid drum sound and a really solid vocal sound, and like you can kind of have not great guitars and it still sounds great. But in this particular instance, the drum tones don't sound great and the vocals sound okay, but they're definitely lacking a lot of harmonics. They're not saturated very well. Like, they don't sound like they fit in the mix. They sound like they were recorded with a cheap microphone and a really transparent cheap preamp, and it's not blending with everything. So while there are mixing issues, we can't even really begin to address those until the recording sounds halfway decent. You need to work with somebody that really knows what they're doing on the recording end. You need someone that can get good drum sounds, tune the drums well, mic the drums really well. You need somebody that can pull a good performance out of the musicians, out of the drummer, out of the vocalist. And that's where a good producer comes in. The songwriting's halfway decent, it has potential, but you need to get those tones right on the way in. You need to get the right performance on the way in. So, you know, if you guys need a good producer, that's a big part of what I do. Like, feel free to reach out. This mix was sent in by Fabian.
Are you still caring, or am I irrelevant?
All right, the intro sounded pretty good. It was a little long. It was like just interesting enough. I might not have turned it off, but you could have shortened that up a little bit. So far, the tones of all the instruments sound pretty good, but like it feels like they're not quite gelling together as well as they could. That could probably mean just a little bit more mix bus compression. The left-right balance is kind of off. That's probably because you have one guitar all the way left, and then it sounds like the bass is all the way to the right, which isn't unheard of, but it's kind of not really done much anymore. Like, for the last 20, 30 years or so, it's kind of rare to have a song with guitar on the left and bass on the right, and then you have another lead guitar like right up the middle. If anything, I would put the bass right up the middle and put the lead guitar off to the right. But really what I would do is have the bass up the middle, double the rhythm guitar, and then also have the lead guitar up the middle. Once the vocals come in, we've had like 10 seconds of vocals already, and already they're like really pitchy, like they're all over the place. So far the vocals don't sound good. That might have been a little bit intentional because of the way the vocals came in. It sounds like they're kind of low energy, exasperated sounding, so that might have been an intentional choice, but they're definitely out of tune and it's noticeable. Alright, man, this was clearly mixed by guitars. The guitars are overpowering everything. The level of the bass isn't that bad, like we can still hear it, but the vocals are basically unintelligible. Like, they're drowned to the point that we can't even understand what the vocalist is saying. And the drums are so far in the background that they might as well not even be there. Like, you really need to bring the drums up a lot more to add energy to the song. So again, like, the source tones are pretty good. Biggest problems here is just balance. Like, the drums got to come up, guitars got to come down, vocals need to cut through a little bit more. That's going to be EQ. The vocals are pitchy. You could probably blend things together a little more with mix bus compression. You probably didn't use enough because the balance is off already. Or if you did use it, it's not helping because the balance is off. You need to get a really solid balance with the faders before you start doing other stuff. So that's your biggest problem here, is just the overall balance of things is off. And then the other big thing is the vocals sound pitchy, and that's kind of ruining them for me. But the drums especially are lacking a lot of energy. They're too far in the background, and that's something that I'm normally really good at, is getting really, really punchy drum sounds. So if you guys want this mix to sound as good as it can sound, and it has a lot of potential because the source tones are there, if you want a better mix, hit me up.